In the winter of 1929, beneath the temple ruins of ancient Girsu, workers pulled a sealed clay jar from a foundation trench untouched for 4,000 years. Inside lay a single tablet. The cataloguer wrote one cautious line in the ledger and locked it in a basement drawer unread for 4 full decades. When a Leiden philologist finally translated it in 1968, he refused to publish. The tablet describes a 4-legged creature sent down from the sky. It describes the dog and its purpose. Tap subscribe and turn notifications on, because translations like this stay buried unless channels like this grow. The story of how the tablet came back into the light begins with a man named Pieter Vandermeer, a junior Assyriologist from Leiden, who arrived at the University of Pennsylvania Museum in the autumn of 1968 on a 12-month research exchange. Vandermeer was 31 years old, specialist in temple administrative documents of the late 3rd millennium, and he had been handed the assignment that no senior scholar in the building wanted. The staff called it the Residue Collection, a body of roughly 180 minor tablets, fragments, and seal impressions recovered from the Girsu excavations of the late 1920s and never formally examined. Most of the residue was exactly what everyone assumed it to be: inventories of barley, receipts for wool, lists of temple labourers and the rations owed to them at the turning of each month. The kind of bureaucratic sediment that settles in the corners of every Mesopotamian excavation and waits, sometimes for generations, for someone with enough patience and enough obscurity to be assigned to read it. In his 5th week, Vandermeer opened drawer 9. Inside it, wrapped in a length of oiled linen that had gone stiff and brown with age, was a tablet no larger than a man's palm, its surface carrying cuneiform pressed with unusual fineness, almost tenderness, as though the scribe had understood that what he was recording would never be recorded again. The catalogue card gave the accession number G118. And a single line of description, written in 1929 by an assistant cataloguer who noted, in his own hand, that he had spent less than 1 hour with the piece. The line read, "Content of mythological or votive character, defer to senior staff. No senior staff had ever come." The tablet had waited 39 years. Vandermeer would later write in a private letter to a colleague at the Oriental Institute in Chicago that he knew within the first 8 lines that the tablet did not belong in the residue collection at all. It belongs somewhere else, he wrote, somewhere this museum has not yet built a room for. The paleography dated the piece to the final generations of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, more than 4,000 years before his own time, and the clay itself, dense and finely levigated, was temple grade, the kind reserved for documents meant to outlast the men who wrote them. The scribe identified himself in the opening lines by a name that translates roughly as Lugal Namtar, son of Urbagara, a temple official attached to the house of Gula at Girsu. This detail mattered, and Vandermeer underlined it twice in his working notes. Gula was the Sumerian goddess of healing, the great physician of the gods, and her sacred animal. In every text and on every carved boundary stone where her symbol appears was the dog. Her temples kept dogs. Her precincts, when archaeologists later excavated them at Isin, were found to contain the careful burials of dozens of them, interred beneath the walkways with a formality, otherwise reserved for people. Scholars have called this a cult practice and left it there. The tablet in drawer 9 does not leave it there. The opening of the text is formal. It invokes the high gods. It asks the favour of the scribe of heaven. And it declares that what follows is a true accounting of an old matter given to the writer by his father, who received it from his father, going back, the tablet says, to the days when the gods still came down to inspect the dwellings of men and the nights without walls had not yet been forgotten. That phrase, the nights without walls, appears 5 times across the surface of the tablet, and Vandermeer would spend the better part of a year trying to fix its meaning. His eventual conclusion, set down in an unpublished monograph he completed in 1973, was that it did not refer to a time before cities. It referred to a condition, a state in which the boundary around a human dwelling, the invisible line that separates the place where men sleep from the open dark beyond it, stands unguarded. The Sumerians, he argued, believed that such a boundary was not a metaphor. It was a real perimeter, as real as a wall of baked brick, and it could be held, or it could be lost. We will return to that detail, because it matters more than it sounds. What Vandermeer read next, alone at a long table in the museum's reading room on a November evening in 1968, was the reason the tablet had been sealed inside a foundation jar in the first place. The scribe had recorded the arrival on Earth of a four-legged creature, brought down out of the sky by the Anunnaki for a purpose the tablet names in 3 words: the standing, the watching, the binding. Vandermeer set the tablet down. According to the museum's own reading room log, which still exists, he signed out at 9:14 that evening and signed back in at 10:02. 48 minutes. He never explained, in any letter or note that survives, where he went or what he thought about in that time. He came back, sat down at the long table, and began to translate. He worked on the tablet for the remainder of his exchange year, and then, after returning to Leiden, on photographs and hand copies for 4 years more. Colleagues who knew him in this period describe a careful, unexcitable man who had become quietly consumed. He declined 2 positions. He published almost nothing else. His sister would later say that he kept a single line from the tablet pinned above his desk, in his own transliteration, and that he refused to tell her what it meant, saying only that he had not yet earned the right to be sure of it. The tablet, for its part, gives no sign that its scribe expected to be doubted. Lugal Namtar writes in the calm, unhurried voice that Sumerian officials reserved for matters of record, the voice of inventories and boundary agreements, the voice of a man setting down what is owed and to whom. He was not composing a myth. He believed plainly and completely that he was preserving an administrative truth about the world, one that the men of his own generation were already beginning to let slip. Before the account of the arrival itself, he pauses to state his reason for writing, and the sentence is difficult to read as anything but a warning. The sons of the temple no longer say the old names, and he writes, they see the creature at the gate and they see only the creature. I write so that the gate will still be known. What the tablet describes next is the arrival. The record is precise. It has never been published. The Anunnaki, the scribe records, came down from their dwelling places in the higher sky to inspect the early settlements of men, and they found among the dwellings a great affliction. The affliction did not strike inside the houses, it struck at the edges. Shepherds who slept beyond the last wall were found in the morning cold and emptied. Without wound and without mark, their faces turned toward the open country. Livestock penned at the outermost boundary sickened, while animals penned nearer the centre did not. And the children of the settlements, the tablet says, would not go past the last fire after dark, and when their fathers asked them why, the children pointed at the darkness beyond the flame and wept until they were carried inside. The elders went to the priests went to the offering stones carried the matter upward, and the gods, the tablet says, recognized the affliction at once because the affliction was not new to them. The cause, the scribe states with no hesitation at all, was that things were moving in the open dark beyond the fires, things drawn to the warmth of men the way moths are drawn to the lamp, and that these things circled the settlements each night, testing the edges, probing for the place where the boundary of the dwelling had worn thin. He gives them a name. He calls them the circling ones. They have no bodies of their own, he writes, and this is why they hunger. They cannot cross a boundary that is held, but a boundary that no one holds, the tablet says, is not a boundary. It is an invitation. The the Anunnaki conferred among themselves. One of them, named in the text as the Lady of the House of Healing, whom Vandermeer identifies without reservation as Gula, proposed a solution. The solution was not a wall, because the circling ones do not respect brick. It was not fire, because fire dies at dawn's approach in the grey hour when, the tablet notes, the circling ones are boldest. The solution was to bring down from a world the tablet never names, referring to it only as the red star of the ninth gate, a creature that already existed there for exactly this purpose. A creature whose senses reached where human senses ended. A creature whose voice carried a signature the circling ones could not endure. A creature that could be given to men, and, this phrase stopped Vandermeer for a full week, that would consent to be given. The tablet then describes the creature in a passage that occupies more than a quarter of its surface, and the description is unmistakable. 4 legs, a tail that speaks, held high in gladness, low in wariness, level and rigid in the moment of work. Ears that turn toward a sound the way a door turns on its hinge, each ear moving alone, hearing what has not yet happened. A nose, the scribe writes, that reads the air as a scribe reads a tablet, taking from it the record of everything that has passed and everything that approaches. Eyes that catch the low light and hold it. And set into the body, the tablet says, deeper than the flesh and deeper than the bone, a binding toward men that is not affection and is not habit, but is written into the creature the way the wedge is written into clay, so that it cannot be unwritten, not by hunger, not by beating, not by 1,000 generations. The creature does not stay with men, because men feed it, the scribe writes. Men feed it because it stays. The creature sleeps lightly, the tablet says, and never entirely. Its sleep is a listening that wears the appearance of resting. It positions itself, without instruction, between the sleepers and the door, and when it rises in the night, when it stands with its ears forward and its body still, facing a darkness in which nothing visible moves, it is at that moment doing the work for which it was brought down to earth. The scribe gives the creature a name, and the name is where Vandermeer's difficulties began. The tablet calls it the Urkhalam, a term he translated, with considerable hesitation, as the one who stands between. He hesitated because the ordinary Sumerian word for the dog is or Urgie for the domestic dog, and both appear in thousands of surviving texts, in proverbs, in lexical lists, in the records of the temple kennels themselves. The term Urkalam appears in no other tablet from any other site. It is used once, only here, on Gula 84. Vandermeer's conclusion, defended across 11 pages of the 1973 monograph, is that Urkhalam was never the common word for the animal at all. It was a ceremonial word, a priestly word, spoken only when the creature was addressed in its original capacity. In the street, the dog was Ur. In the inner rooms of the house of Gula, when the priest spoke of what had been posted at the gates of men, the dog was Urkhalam, the one who stands between the dwelling and the open dark. The next passage describes the deployment, and the order is deliberate. The Anunnaki brought the creatures down in numbers, the tablet records as more than the stars of the third watch, and placed them first at the temples, then at the houses of the priests, then at the gates of the kings, and last, and this the scribe underlines with a doubled wedge, among the shepherds and the ordinary men who slept farthest from the walls. The temples came first because the temples were built where the boundaries ran thinnest, raised deliberately over the worn places to mark them and to manage them. But the shepherds, the tablet says, received the greatest number, because the shepherds held the true edge, the outermost line of the dwellings of men, the place where the circling ones tested first. This is why 4,000 years later the dog is still called the shepherd's companion. the tablet would say the phrase has survived the reason, and at each posting the scribe records, a rite was performed, a naming at the creature's arrival and a mourning at its death, and the words of both rites, he writes, were already being forgotten in his own generation. He sets down neither rite in full. He says only that the first word of the naming was spoken not to the creature. It was spoken to whatever was watching from the dark, and it was a warning. The heart of the tablet, the passage that made Vandermeer sign out of the reading room and stand for 48 minutes wherever he stood, is the sequence in which the scribe records the original purpose of the creature in 7 specific duties. He writes them in order, in the calm administrative voice that Sumerian scribes reserved for all serious matters, as though he were listing the obligations of a temple official. In a sense, the tablet would say, that is exactly what he was doing. The first duty is the holding of the perimeter. Every dwelling of men, the tablet says, is ringed by an invisible line, the boundary that separates the place of sleep from the open dark, and this line must be walked. The creature walks it. It patrols the edge of the camp, the wall of the courtyard, the fence of the yard, not once but continually, and each circuit, the scribe writes, presses the line deeper, the way a path is pressed into grass. Anyone who has ever watched a dog trace the same route along a fence line, or day after day, for no reason anyone could name, has seen the first duty being performed exactly as it was recorded 4,000 years ago. The second duty is the watching of the road. Every road that approaches a dwelling is a channel, and the circling ones, the tablet says, prefer channels, because a channel is a boundary already interrupted. The creature places itself where it can see the road, and it watches, sometimes for hours, staring down a path on which nothing visible moves. It does not watch out of expectation, the scribe writes. It watches because the road must be watched, and there is no one else to do it. The third duty is the testing of those who enter. When a stranger approaches the dwelling, the creature goes to him first before any man reaches him and reads him. The nose takes the record of where he has been. The eyes take the record of what he carries within, and the judgment, the tablet says, is rendered in moments and is not appealed. If the creature accepts the stranger may pass. If it will not accept him, if it stands rigid, if the hair along its spine rises, if it places itself between the stranger and the door and will not be called away, then the stranger, the tablet says plainly, has brought something with him, whether he knows it or not, and he should not be admitted until it has left him. Anyone who has ever trusted a dog's dislike of a person without being able to explain it has followed the third duty to the letter. The fourth duty is the marking of the boundary. The creature seals the perimeter with its own signature, at the corners, at the gateposts, at the places where paths cross the line, renewing the marks at intervals as a watchman renews the oil in his lamps. A dwelling marked in this manner for a sufficient length of time becomes, in the language of the scribe, closed against the lower approaches. A dwelling without the mark stands, by default, open. We have taught ourselves to find the behaviour faintly comical. The tablet records it as the maintenance of a seal. The fifth duty is the breaking of the silence. The circling ones, the tablet says, move most freely when the night is at its stillest, in the hours when even the wind lies down, because a perfect silence is itself a kind of opening, and the creature shatters it. The sudden barking at nothing in the deepest hour of the night, at a fence beyond which nothing stands, is not a failure of the animal's judgment. It is, the scribe writes, the sound by which the way is closed. The bark is not fear. The bark is a door being slammed. And the answering barks that ripple outward across a settlement, dog after dog into the distance, are the sound of the whole boundary being closed at once, each holder sealing its own portion of the line. Anyone who has lain awake listening to that chain of voices travel across a town at 3 in the morning has heard the 5th duty, passed from post to post. The 6th duty is the drawing of the ring. Before the creature lies down to rest, it turns in a circle, once, twice, 3 times, and only then settles. The scholars of animal behaviour explain this as an inheritance from wild ancestors flattening grass. The tablet explains it differently. The turning, the scribe writes, draws a ring, and the ring is a boundary in miniature, a closed line within which the creature's rest is held, so that even in sleep it remains inside its own small wall and can keep its listening intact. The creature does not circle out of habit. It circles because a watchman does not lie down in the open. The 7th duty is the one Vandermeer, in a marginal note on his own manuscript, called the passage he could not read twice in one sitting. It is described as the binding of the sleeper. When the men of the dwelling sleep, the tablet says, the inner light loosens in the body, and it is then that the circling ones reach for it. The creature counters this in the simplest way that exists. It comes to the sleeper, and it lies against him. The length of its body along the length of his, the weight of it, the warmth of it, the slow tide of its breathing. These are not comfort, the scribe writes, or they are not only comfort. The contact anchors the inner light back into the flesh, holds it in the body the way a hand holds a lamp in the wind, and the low sigh the creature gives as it settles against the sleeper, the deep exhalation every dog owner has heard 1,000 times, is recorded in the tablet in 4 words, the sound of the binding taking hold. 7 duties. The holding, the watching, the testing, the marking, the breaking, the drawing, the binding. The scribe lists them without wonder, the way a man lists the duties of a gatekeeper, because to him that is precisely what they were, and then he adds a single line that sits alone on the tablet, set off by a blank band of clay above and below it, the only line on the entire surface given that distinction. Vandermeer's translation of the line took him, by his own account, 11 days. The line reads, "They were not given the duties, they asked for them." Vandermeer's monograph offers no commentary on that sentence. He simply lets it stand. So does the tablet. Vandermeer completed his translation in the winter of 1973. It ran to 38 pages. He submitted it to 3 journals. All 3 rejected it. One returned the manuscript within a month with a letter stating that the subject matter fell outside the boundaries of serious philological publication. Another sent it for peer review and reported back that the reviewers could not agree on whether the work was scholarship or an elaborate and pointless forgery. The third kept the manuscript for 11 months and returned it without a single comment attached. He circulated it privately after that in typed carbon copies to a small circle of colleagues at Leiden, Oxford, Chicago and Rome. The copies were passed hand to hand, photocopied, recopied, and over the following decades they settled into the underground literature of fringe Mesopotamian studies, where they remain. The tablet itself was quietly transferred in 1979 from the open archive of the Penn Museum to restricted storage in the lower basement, where access now requires the written approval of the curator of the Near Eastern collection. Researchers who have requested that approval over the past 40 years report, almost without exception, the same outcome. The requests are denied. No reason is given. Drawer 9 stays closed. But the history that followed the scribe of Girsu reads, if the tablet is to be believed, like a long trail of evidence hiding in the open. At Isin, the city of Gula, archaeologists uncovered the burials of more than 30 dogs beneath the ramp of her temple, interred with care, some with offerings laid down over generations along the approach to the goddess of healing. This is not legend. The excavation reports exist. The standard explanation is cult practice, and the explanation ends there. The tablet does not end there. The tablet would say the dogs were buried at the threshold because the threshold was their post, and that a guardian is laid to rest at the door it kept. Post-Egypt remembered next, and remembered strangely. Anubis, the god who guards the passage between the world of the living and whatever lies beyond it, was given the head of a dog-like creature, and no Egyptologist has ever fully settled why. The god who stands at the most dangerous door in existence, the final one, wears the face of the animal that sleeps against ours. The tablet would say this is not symbolism. It is a job description, remembered after the reason was lost. Job, Greece, remembered in fragments. Hecate, goddess of crossroads and thresholds, of the places where ways meet and boundaries interrupt each other, was accompanied always by dogs, and the Greeks said that when dogs howled in the night for no reason, it was because they saw her passing where humans saw nothing. And at the last boundary of all, the door of the underworld itself, the Greeks did not station a soldier or a spirit or a wall of fire. They stationed a dog. The tablet would say they no longer knew why that felt correct. It would say it felt correct because it was. Dog. By the medieval centuries, the memory had thinned to stories of loyalty. The hound that would not leave its master's grave, the dog that woke the household in the night before the fire was visible, before the flood arrived, before the intruder reached the door. We filed these under devotion and instinct, under sharp ears and good nose. The tablet filed them 4,000 years in advance, under the duties. Duties. And this is what Vandermeer's translation forces us to confront, if we accept it even provisionally. Everything we believe about this relationship is upside down. We did not domesticate the dog. The tablet would say the dog accepted a posting. We do not trade food and shelter for companionship. We trade food and shelter for the continued performance of work that no member of our species can see, and that not one of us has ever asked them to do. The dog lying across your doorway is not in the way. It is at its post. The dog barking at an empty street at 3 a.m. is not confused. The dog pressing the length of its body against yours as you fall asleep, sighing that long, low sigh, is not only seeking warmth. Every one of these behaviours, the tablet would say, is the same set of 7 duties the scribe recorded 4,000 years ago, preserved complete within the creature, even as the civilization that once understood them forgot that there was anything to understand. 7. Vandermeer died in 1994 without seeing his translation published by any press. The carbon copies still circulate. The tablet still sits in its restricted drawer in Philadelphia, and the requests to see it are still denied. And the dogs, in every house and yard and farm and city street where they have made their postings, continue. They walk the fence lines, they watch the empty roads, they judge the strangers, they shatter the silences, they draw their small rings and lie down inside them, facing the door. Postings. Whatever you believe about the tablet, whatever you believe about the Anunnaki or the Red Star of the Ninth Gate, there is one observation that requires no belief at all. If you live with a dog, watch it tonight. Watch where it chooses to lie when the lights go out. Watch which way it faces. Watch what it does in the moment before it allows itself to sleep, and notice that it places itself always between you and the way in. Then remember the line the scribe set apart from every other line on the tablet, framed in blank clay. The sentence Vandermeer needed 11 days to allow himself to write down. They were not given the duties, they asked for them. Near its end, the tablet turns briefly to the question of what would happen if the creatures were ever to abandon their posts, and the scribe records that the priests of Gula refused to answer it aloud. He notes only that they looked toward the dark beyond the temple lamps when it was asked. And in the final line of the tablet, partially damaged but still legible, the scribe writes this: "The dogs stayed because they were told what would come for us if they left, and that is why they sleep facing the door." The scribe does not say what they were told, the tablet is silent, the drawer is closed. Which leaves the question with you, the one the priests would not answer and the tablet would not record. What exactly are they still standing between us and? The dogs know, they have always known. And perhaps that is why, in the quietest hour of the night, when your dog lifts its head and stares at the darkness with an attention nothing visible explains, it never once looks away first.